My name's Polly Pistol, and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date is April the 11th of 1977. And by God's grace and Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm sober today. I have a home group, and it's the West Connect group in Jacksonville, Florida. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor, and I'm an active member in the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I think that gives my credentials. The other thing I'd like to say is, Rob, thank you for inviting me. I love Toronto. I feel like I'm here. I wasn't too long ago. I think it was like maybe 2 years ago. I was at the ORC, and I love Toronto. So thank you so much. And the other thing I want to do, I want 2 shout outs. Let me start with Dustin. Dustin, you are the greatest greeter. That was just absolutely amazing that you greeted everybody that came on. That was fabulous. The other thing is, I want to give a shout out for your interpreter. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm up close and personal to the deaf. My grandson on the 23rd of May will be 27 years old, and he was born deaf, and he is an amazing man, an absolutely amazing man, and he's a civil engineer today, graduated from college, and I guarantee you he was one of those kind that never let his deafness stop him from doing anything. But if he were in this meeting, he would need an interpreter. So I just thank you so much that you have an interpreter in your meeting. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that I should share in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm trying to be today. And I'm going to do that to the very best of my ability. And I want to start off by saying I was born into a family who loved me. I was a loved and cherished child, and I was an only child. However, that did not stop me from getting the disease of alcoholism. And the other thing is, when I came to the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't even know another alcoholic. There is no alcoholism in my family. There was my husband and my ex-husband and I, my first husband, I hate the word ex, my first husband and I spent 22 years in the military, and he was retired, he was medically retired for part of that, but we were connected to the military. While married to him, I was for 22 years, and I don't know anybody in the military who's alcoholic. I have known none of my friends or any, so consequently, I didn't know anything about the disease of alcoholism. I'd seen Days of Wine and Roses and I'll Cry Tomorrow, but none of that applied to me. So that's kind of that's the background of being a loved and cherished child. Now, I know that something has been wrong with me all my life. I didn't know what that thing was until I came to the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me I am mentally and bodily different from my fellows. And whatever was inside of me, here I was this cherished child. But in a few months, I'm going to be 80 years old. Now, when I was a little girl, mothers didn't work, but my mother worked. And I didn't like it. I didn't like that she worked. It embarrassed me. I was a latchkey kid before it was ever popular. And my mother was a nurse. Now, my dad was a contractor. He had an 8th grade education. And the reason she worked is because my dad and my mom sacrificed to give me everything any little girl would want. And not only that, I'm an only child. But I was so ungrateful. My mother worked. My mother was a seamstress. She made my dance costumes. She made my evening gowns, and she made my clothes. And I was so ungrateful. I would scream at her, I don't want you to make my clothes. I want store-bought clothes like other little girls have. I didn't appreciate anything. And I think there's another big book that talks about somebody like me. And in that book, it says there's nothing worse than an ungrateful child. And that's what I was, very ungrateful. Today, I see, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, how blessed I was. And my parents gave me a beautiful gift, and that was the gift of love. They loved me. And I was shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit for a long time. But thanks to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can deeply feel that today. I can deeply feel that love that they so desperately showered on me. When I was 18 years old, I first want to tell you about being brought up Southern Baptist, because that has a lot to do with my story. And I was brought up Southern Baptist, and I can tell you, I always knew there was a God. It was just one of those gods that was going to get you. He's looking out for bad little girls, especially me. And I can hear those Baptist preachers as they would preaching, screaming. They're red in the face. You're born a sinner. You're going to burn in hell. And this is the kind of God that I brought into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew by the time I got to AA, I knew I was burning in hell. There is no way that God would forgive me for what I had done while I was drinking. I felt that my sins, that I was taught, were unforgivable. I thought they were unforgivable sins. What happened when I was 18 years old, I married an Air Force officer. And I fell in love with his uniform. I thought I had married this prince, and we were just sailing off into the sunset and going to live happily ever after. I had no idea what I had signed up for. And what happened was it didn't take me long to learn that I was invited to a coffee by the base commander's wife that was mandatory that I attend. I went to this coffee, and she began to tell me tell all of us little second lieutenants' wives what our responsibility would be to enhance our husband's career. How I would attend the right dinner parties, how I would have the right dinner parties, I would attend all the functions. It would be my responsibility to be present for my husband. And shortly after I went to this coffee, I went to an officer's wives luncheon. And that luncheon would change my life forever. And what happened is that when you were raised Southern Baptist in the South, in Texas, when they say thou shalt not drink, we didn't. They did not drink. And my parents didn't drink. No one in my family drank. Nobody drank. And when I went to this luncheon, and there was this big long table, and they had these little glasses lined up on the table. They had a big fountain with this liquid coming out of it. And I saw these ladies pick up that glass and put it under the fountain. And I picked up the glass and I put it under the fountain. And I took a drink. Now I'm here to tell you, 43 years later, that very drink, 43 years sober, it's been a long time. Because I was only 18 years old, and I'm almost 80, so that was a long time ago, 62 years. That drink is implanted in my brain. Totally, I can remember it as if it were yesterday. I took that drink, it went down, it was so warm, and I was one of these people that was just always uptight. It just seemed like I was just always strung out and nervous and stressed out and uptight. And all of a sudden that drink it just seemed like I could just take a breath. I could just breathe. And I went up to that fountain and I put my glass under again. and I had another drink. Now, I didn't get drunk that day. I had those 2 glasses of sherry. What I didn't know that day was my life was altered forever. I would never be the same again, because whatever that is, that's inside of me that makes me mentally and bodily different from my fellows, I had just ignited with alcohol. And I didn't become a falling down drunk right away. But what happened is shortly thereafter, I became a drunk. I had 2 little boys, and for the while they were toddlers and while they were, started grammar school, I was there for them. I was a mother that could take care of them, but yet I was still drinking. But yet I had not gone into total alcoholism. I was still able to care for them. However, I was still a person that was very impatient and very nervous. And I went to Air Force doctors, and they gave me tablets. They gave me tranquilizers and barbiturates, and I would drink on top of those tranquilizers and barbiturates. So I was beginning to be well on my way to alcoholism. I drank for 18 years. And what happened to me in that 18 years is I crossed over into alcoholism, and I became a child abuser. I abused my children. I pushed them into walls. I hit them. I screamed at them. I called them names. I did all the horrible, abusive things that you hear parents doing. What happened for me is I would take a drink of alcohol and I would be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I would become another person. I would become very mean. And as my disease progressed and the meanness lasted longer than the soberness did, and my children were paying a price day after day, it finally became that I couldn't put them to bed at night. I couldn't get them up in the morning. I could not care for my kids. I was incapable of caring for my kids. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. And these 2 stories, I'm a blackout drinker, and I have a son who's sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he doesn't tell this story to make me feel bad. He doesn't do that at all. He tells this story to show his reaction to his reality. His reality was totally altered, his whole reality. And what happened was, as he had gotten himself up this morning, he probably was at about 10 years old, and he'd come into the kitchen and he found his mother passed out on the floor. As he says in his talk, he assessed the situation. He just stepped over me, got his cereal, the milk, the whole thing, put it together, stepped back over me, sat down and ate his breakfast and felt nothing. That is not a normal reaction to that scene. But however, that was James's reality, because he had seen that scene over and over and over again. That was his reality. My oldest son was who took care of me. And if you take the kind of pills that I took, I called them tablets then. If you took the kind of tablets that I took and drank alcohol, you don't breathe too good. When you pass out, we breathe very shallow. And what happened is many of the times I've come to with my oldest son screaming, "Mom, wake up, are you dead?" And me to see the fear in his eyes. And for the past 43 years, I haven't had to see that kind of fear in anybody's eyes because of something I'm doing. But I can tell you right now, I don't ever want to forget that. I don't ever want to forget who she was. I don't ever want to forget who that woman was, because I know she sits right here on my shoulder. Because I know the disease of alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and patient. And I know that if I rest on my laurels, I can go back to being that woman. And I never want her to come back again. I will sponsor all the women I need to sponsor. I will do all the service I need to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. I will read the book. I will read the 12 and 12. I will read literature. I will do whatever it takes because I never want her to show up again. And I know with this program, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me I get a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And when it says maintenance, that means I need to do something. I need to do something. I need to take action. I need to be responsible for my sobriety because I get a daily reprieve. And I have a spiritual toolkit. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a spiritual toolkit to use. And I'm going to use that every day. And I pray when I open my eyes in the morning, I just thank God. I'm just so glad that I see I'm still here. I thank God for my health so that I can take care of my husband. And I thank him over and over for my sobriety. Because if it were not for my sobriety, I would not have the life that I have today. And my life today is so wonderful. I'm going to tell you about that later. At any rate, my alcoholism progressed. And so I need to tell you what happened. And what happened was I had a car wreck in Irving, Texas, not far from where I lived in Hurst, Texas. And that car wreck would bring me to treatment for the first time. And what happened is, I called the police when I had that wreck, told them my car had been stolen. Here comes the police, my husband's with them, and I'm taken to the Irving police station. And I get to see that look in the non-alcoholic's eyes that just doesn't understand why we do the things we do. And he just looked at me, and then he looked at my husband, and he said, just take her home and sober her up. And on the way home, my husband said to me, Polly, there's a treatment center. It's not far from our house. I wish you would go. And that night I entered this treatment center. Now, it was a detox center. It was a 7-day detox center. And this was no fancy jitter joint. This was a county detox. And I entered that detox, and they gave me some nice little pills that kind of float you down. And then the next day I got up, and they gave me some more of those little pills. And they set you in group, even though you could hardly keep from nodding out and sitting there. But after we got through with group, and the counselors left, all of the patients gathered around and started telling war stories. And oh my God, some of those people there were divorced. Some of them had been to jail. Some of them had been to prison. And they all were cussing like sailors. Now, I'm here to tell you, when I entered that detox center, I didn't even say the F word. I can tell you I'm really good at it today, but I didn't say it then. And I was just horrified at the way these people talked and what they had done. And I looked around and I said, I'm not like these people. I'm not like them. And as my husband says, an alcoholic can lay in the gutter feeling superior to those looking down on him. And that's what I was. However, I am so ashamed and so mortified because I don't have any funny stories to tell. I don't have any DUIs. I've never been arrested. What I've done is I have abused 2 little boys. And at home, I have a husband who is 100% disabled from the military that I can't take care of. My father is in Abilene, Texas, 3 hours away, dying from colon cancer. I'm his only child, and I can't get there because of my alcoholism to see him. I'm not saying anything. I'm not telling any of my war stories because I'm too ashamed of who and what I am. And while I was in there, I ended up having a jailhouse romance, where sick falls in love with sick and you walk off into happy destiny. We walked off into happy destiny for 58 days. And I ended up getting 12 stepped out of a motel in Euless, Texas, and brought back into that detox center. And I had experienced things in that motel that I had only read about. My life now has got even more shame in it than I had brought in. And I sat there and I knew when I entered that detox center that what was wrong with me was sobriety. There's no way I can live sober with who and what I am. I am so horrible. And I know for sure I'm going to burn in hell. You can't do what I've done. And as I felt like I was so riddled with sin that there's no way that God could possibly do anything to help me. I just felt I'm so hopeless. What I did is I stayed that 7 days because I really didn't want to draw any attention to myself. But what happened was when that 7 days was up, I got a bottle of scotch and I got a bottle of Valium and I checked into a motel. I don't think there's anybody sitting on this Zoom that doesn't have an angel in your life. Someone who somehow or another gets us to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Some angel. And I had an angel in my life. And what she said is she said that day that something came over her. And I know today that something was God working in my life through her. And she drove around until she found my car parked outside this motel. And I hadn't shut the door all the way. I had just closed it. And she pushed it open and she found me laying there. And she called 911. And I was pronounced dead on arrival in a hospital in Bedford, Texas. Needless to say, that didn't take. I'm sitting here tonight. But that story is told by alcoholic after alcoholic after alcoholic. We're the people who should be dead, but we're not. But what happened was, for me, was in 1977, it was no different than 2020. If you try to take your life, you get the attention of the authorities. And what happened is I was put on a 72-hour hold and carted off to a psychiatric hospital. And that 72 hours gave my husband enough time to get a court order from a Fort Worth judge and have me committed to treatment. And the papers read that I was a detriment to myself and others. Now, I had no idea for many months later and how blessed I was. And today, I can tell you so many times that God has interfered in my life without my permission. I didn't want to go to treatment. I didn't ask to go to treatment. I didn't want to be saved. My girlfriend saved me. I know that God has been there and He has interfered in my life without my permission. And I am so grateful to the God of my understanding. I am so grateful today to be sober and to be alive and be able to carry a message that God saved me. And He worked through people. That's how He uses us. Every last person who has the gift of sobriety. And I believe it's a gift because I could not stop drinking no matter what. And somehow or another, it has just been lifted out of me, that has been taken away. I have been separated. I love it. That's a word that a lot of people are using today, and I love it. I was separated from alcohol. On April the 11th, 1977, I entered a treatment center in Dallas, Texas, and I was separated from alcohol. And because of a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since. The 12 steps and the 12 traditions and the 12 concepts. What happened for me in that hospital is I got introduced to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was a 12-step program. And what they did is they brought people in from the outside, and they would take us to meetings. They'd pack us in these little buses, and they'd take us off to meetings. And I got introduced to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what happened is I started to fall in love with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. What had happened in that treatment center, it was a 5-step treatment center. We were supposed to go through the first 5 steps. And when my 28 days, which was extended to 6 weeks, some of us are sicker than others, I stayed in that treatment center for 6 weeks. I was told to get a sponsor. I have had 3 sponsors. My first sponsor was a man. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. My second sponsor was a woman named Dottie Harris, and she died 5 years ago. She was my sponsor for 33 years. And today my sponsor is Rena Kay, and she has been my sponsor for 5 years. I am so grateful that I am still sponsorable. I am so grateful that I was given these tools and that I have not been without a sponsor since I got sober. God put Rena in my life before Dottie died. I didn't know that Dottie was going to die when she died, but Rena had been put in my life before Dottie died. And what happened is I got Frank for my sponsor, and I'm going to tell a little story. It's a little brick road story. You know how we talk about if one brick were out of place in our history of Alcoholics Anonymous, none of us would be here. It's just like every stone needs to be placed, and that's what happened in my life. And what happened is this man who was director of this treatment center had been a priest in the Navy and a captain in the Navy, and he was an only child. And by him telling me that, it drew me to him. And what happened is he got sober at Long Beach Naval Hospital in Long Beach and was sponsored by a man named Frank Honeycutt. And what would happen is I would meet Frank in Hurst, Texas, with my sponsor named Frank as well. And what would happen is 3.5 years later, 5 years later, 3.5 years later, I married Dave, and we moved to Michigan, and then we moved to Southern California. And I would be hooked up. I would be in Southern California, and I would be hooked up with Frank Honeycutt. You cannot make this stuff up. God's hand just hovers over our lives and directs us. And you look back and you see how the path was, and you can't believe how God was directing everything. But what happened is Frank, I had asked Frank to be my sponsor. I was told I had to get a sponsor. And this man just touched my heart. And what happened while I was in that detox center, he was also who had 12-stepped me out of that motel and brought me back into that treatment center. And when I got out of treatment, I went up to him and I went to his house. He had told me to come to his house as soon as I get out of treatment. And I went to his house and I said, I'm on step 6. I did my 5th step in treatment yesterday. I'm on step 6. And he looks at me and he says, no, you're not. You're on step 1. That's treatment center psychobabble. You are, and we're going to do the steps out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he began to take me through the steps. And what happened is the first step, I knew I was powerless over alcohol and that my life was unmanageable. But when I came to the second step, and it was talking about a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, I just felt like there's no way that God would save me. There's just no way. Look what I've done. And I still felt all that shame and guilt. And Frank looked at me and he said, Polly, I'm a priest. He had left the priesthood to marry an Asian woman, but he was still a priest. He still loved his Catholic church. He still went to church. He just couldn't be a priest. And what happened was he said, I'm a priest. And I didn't find God in the Catholic Church. I found God in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Polly, if you don't believe God's with you right now, just believe that my God is. And if you can't believe, just believe that I believe. And you can use my God, because my God loves you and forgives you and wants you to be sober and work these steps and be sober and sane one day at a time. And what happened was, is I wrote an inventory for him. I went through the steps and we got to the fourth step. When I did my inventory, I had 5 things on my inventory. I had my husband, my mom and dad, the United States Air Force, and the Baptist Church. And what happened, and I had my 2 sons were on harm's done, because I had no resentment connected to my sons, and I just felt that the only thing I had done was harm them. And what I did is I gave him that inventory. And after I had finished, he looked at me and he said something to me I knew, but I never could say it. And he looked at me and he said, Polly, you're a child abuser. And I just never could get those words out. I just couldn't do it. I knew that that's what I had done. And he says, you're going to make amends to those boys. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make amends to my sons? How do you make amends for doing the things I had done? How do you make amends for that? And he had me write them out on a 3x5 card. And he said, if you don't write it down, you may not get it out. And he had me write up down the amends. And then he had me write on another card, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I will spend the rest of my life being the very best mom I can be. And what happened is I got with my 2 sons and I did these amends together. I do not recommend that for the women I sponsor, but at that time I did both of my sons together. And my sons were 14 and 16 years old when I got sober, and they were angry. And I read my amends. And when I got through doing that, I did just what the book said. I asked them if I'd left out anything and if they had anything to say to me. And I'm telling you, they started firing at me like 2 Uzis were shooting me. They were so angry and they were so mad and they were so ashamed and they were so embarrassed of what I had done to them. They were so embarrassed of me. And I just held my little card and I just kept saying, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I'll spend the rest of my life being the very best mom I can be. I wouldn't take anything today for that experience. Now I've made lots of amends since then because you don't ever get them all out right away. Plus my youngest son is 36 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he and I have made a lot of amends to you. We have talked about this program. We have talked about what happened, and we've been able to make amends. And I cannot tell you the forgiveness that I have experienced. I have been so forgiven, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that. What happened is that I ended up, I had a lot of affairs in Alcoholics Anonymous when I first got sober. Like I said, my libido just woke up. My husband was very ill, and I was not a poster child for AA. I was spending all my time in AA. I was having a lot of affairs with men in AA. I was not taking care of my husband. My boys were still taking care of him. And I was gone. And now I'm just gone in AA doing all this. And I am staying sober. By God's grace, I stayed sober. That I could get to a place that I could make amends for all of this. And so my next inventory that I would do had a lot of people on it. and was very much more difficult. But my first inventory was not. I had known this man, Dave Pistol, and I'd known him since I was 6 months sober. And Dave and I had just been friends. I did not have an affair with Dave, although he sponsored a lot of the men I had affairs with. So he knew more about me than he needed to. But what happened is when I was 3.5 years sober, and he was 4.5 years sober, he came to me and he said, "Polly, I'm in love with you, but I don't want to have an affair with you. I want to marry you. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, come October the 27th of 2020, Dave and I will be married 40 years. And I am so grateful I have been able to spend almost 40 years with the love of my life. We have been able to walk this journey together for almost 40 years. Dave and I, we left Texas, and we say that we left Texas married, but not to each other. And we got married in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then we would go to Southern California. I had heard this woman speak when I was 3 years sober in Austin, Texas. And her name was Dottie Harris. And I had heard her speak, and she moved me like I had never been moved. And I said, I'd said it then, having no idea that I was going to marry Dave, having no idea that he was going to get transferred to Southern California. No idea. I had no idea what God's plan was. I didn't know. But when I heard her that day, I said, if ever I'm anywhere where this woman is, I want to ask her to sponsor me. And when we got to Southern California, I called central office and I got her number. And it was just a miracle. Here she knew my sponsor, Frank, in Texas, because he had gotten sober at the Long Beach Naval Hospital, sponsored by Frank Honeycutt, who she was friends with. I mean, it was just, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it felt like, and as I look back on it, that God had it all orchestrated. I mean, God, I have another big book, and it tells me that God knows about every sand, every hair on my head, everything, every grain of sand on the beach. God knows. He knew all this when I met that lady in Austin, Texas. And then that happened. And my life started to take a turn. It was absolutely amazing. We got involved immediately in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was sponsored by her, and we started following her all around. I had the opportunity. I was so grateful and it's mostly because I'm old, but it's also because she was my sponsor, that I got to meet a man by the name of Chuck C. And Chuck Chamberlain, I had the opportunity to sit at his chair in his house. He was already really, really sick, but I got to sit on the floor, because if you were 5 years or under, if you were new, if 5 years was new in sobriety, you sat on the floor. And I got to hear him. And I wanted to sit by him. As soon as we'd get there, I'd run, go get and put something down so I could sit next to him. I just wanted to feel his energy all over me. And I can just still hear Chuck saying, "Polly, you have one problem." And not saying Polly, but he would say, "We have one problem, and that's conscious separation from God and man. And we have one solution, and that's conscious contact with God and man." And I got to hear him, I got to feel him, and I'll never take anything from those days or anything for that sponsor for introducing me and taking me down the road that she took me for 33 years. And God and I became active in Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of her, and which happens a lot, is one day she was sick and she couldn't go speak at a meeting. And I went and spoke at the meeting. And that opened up another whole life for me. And I started to be able to travel in Alcoholics Anonymous. And Dave and I started to be able to travel. And we met this couple in Omaha. And this couple took us through traditions and relationships because Dave and I wanted to stay married. I'm Dave's fourth wife, and we wanted to stay married. So Dave and I started working the traditions in our relationship, and we started sharing that with people we sponsored and people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then we got to travel and talk about how we work the traditions in our relationship. I'm telling you, we have had such a journey that I wouldn't take anything for in Alcoholics Anonymous. Such a journey. Dave and I have been able to travel the world together. We have been able to share this program and travel the world together. And the only thing and the reason we got to do it is we just drank too much whiskey and went to Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are the reasons we got to do the things we got to do. And Dave and I have spent such a beautiful life together. Now, life's in session. So, I mean, it's, and life happens. Life happens. It's in session. Dave lost, when we were 14 years sober, about 20 years sober, I'm sorry, Dave lost his oldest son. And Mike was sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was only 42 years old when he died. And he got to be in the program with us. When I was 6.5 years sober, my youngest son called me up on the phone and he said, "Mom, I want what you have." And now he's 36 years sober. And he and I have walked this path together. In 1993, Dave lost his job. The bottom fell out of aerospace in Southern California. And we ended up having our house repossessed. We had to file bankruptcy. I mean, I thought the worst thing had happened. And what we ended up doing is we lost that house. We ended up renting a house that was way bigger than the house we had. And we were able to have several young women come live with us who needed a place to stay and to get sober. And we were able to have them in our home. How does that happen? How does that happen? And Dave and I have been able to have this program in our lives. And no matter what has happened, we have been able to have this program. I have been able to sponsor women in this program, take women through the steps, be able to sponsor them, be able to give this program to them. And I am so grateful that I've been able to share that with the women I sponsor. And 5 years ago, Dave got really sick. And 5 years ago, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And then lung cancer is the least of Dave's problem. And then he ended up having to have 2 back surgeries. And then he had 2 bladder cancer surgeries. And then about 1.5 years ago, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And Dave has had a really hard road. And now I'm so grateful. I get to come to Toronto. I get to fly to Toronto and I didn't even leave my house. And I get to come speak in Toronto. And I'm so grateful and so honored that I get to do that. Because I can't travel like that anymore. Because I'm Dave's caregiver. And if I leave, I have to get someone to take care of me. But here's the miracle. There's a bunch of miracles. I have 5 grandchildren. And I'm a fabulous grandmother. They're all grown now. My oldest grandson, the one who's dead, is 27. And they go all the way down to 20. And they're grown now. But I've gotten to be a roller coaster riding grandma. And I think God gives us do-overs. He lets us do it again. And I never, ever could take care of my first husband. I wasn't capable. of taking care of him. And today, I have been Dave's caregiver for 5 years. And not only do I take care of him, I'm honored to take care of him. And I can suit up and show up and do it and be present and be able to do it. And God has allowed me to be able to do a do-over. I want to share something about a resentment. I had a terrible resentment a couple of years ago. I felt like I had been betrayed, that this person took something away from me that I had loved with all my heart. I had given it my heart and soul, and it was taken away from me. And what happened was I just was so resentful, and I just let that resentment had just eaten me up, probably for about 18 months, maybe longer. I can't even remember the time. And I knew that I knew what to do. The book tells me what to do with a resentment. I was inventorying it, giving it to my sponsor. And just as soon as I thought I had gotten rid of it, here would come that gut-wrenching pain again from that resentment. And what happened was, as one day I was just reading my readings and doing the stuff I do every morning when I get up, is read my readings, and then I sit quietly, and I usually make a prayer list of people I want on my prayer list. And I just kind of sit for a few minutes meditating, and it just washed over me. And I call it a spiritual experience. It just washed over me. And all I could see was all the things that I had done to my sons were 1,000 times worse than what this person had done to me. And they forgave me. They forgave me. And because of that forgiveness and seeing what my sons had done for me, I was able to come to that place of forgiveness. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I would never be free of that resentment until I could forgive. And by God's grace in this program, I was able to forgive. And what God has shown me day after day and year after year is his presence, and that he's there. And I have been able to experience the experiences that I have, and I truly know that I have been blessed in every way. Thank you.
Well, Polly, on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today. I could really relate about the amends, particularly making the living amends. I could also relate about the story on resentment that you spoke of, because I had some resentments that were ruling me, and somebody I really respect told me that I bring those resentments into every interaction that I have, so I had to do something about them. So that was what I needed to hear. And, on behalf of all of us, I can comfortably say that we love you, and we're happy you're with us.
Thank you.
We're happy you shared your experience with us too.
Thank you. I love you too. I love you too.
And I wanted to also say that Polly's son will be sharing with us on June 14th. So he will be here to share his experience, strength, and hope. So this is truly a family disease.
Yes.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute everybody. And one thing I wanted to do is explain too, some people might have noticed that we have 2 interpreters tonight. And the reason being is because there's a website that is working on trying to get AA speakers on the website, but they want them all interpreted with American Sign Language. So we have videotaped a second interpreter tonight for that website, and we did it as sort of an experiment. So Polly, you're the first person at the Saturday Speaker Series to have this treatment. And I'm sure once it gets loaded on the website, I can certainly send you the link if you wish.
Thank you.
So now I will unmute everybody.
Thank you, Polly.